Welcome to the Dorothy Thompson Civil Rights Lecture Series. Dorothy Thompson was a remarkable person, a defender of the First Amendment, supporter of civil rights, the university's first affirmative action officer, and the university attorney. This series is a commemoration of her life and her efforts. Tonight, we are privileged to hear from Ambassador Edward Perkins. Dr. Perkins was born in 1928 in rural Louisiana and grew up in the segregated societies of Louisiana and Arkansas. In his teens, he moved to Oregon and there conceived the ambition to do something related to the Foreign Service. After service in both the U.S. Army and the Marines in the late 1960s, early 1970s, he joined the Foreign Service. He rose rapidly through the ranks, and in the late 1986, became the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. This was during the apartheid regime, and his commitment there was to change the U.S. policy from one of constructive engagement to one of a more rigorous attempt to directly end the apartheid regime. He was later ambassador to the United Nations, and since his retirement from government service has been director of an institute at the University of Oklahoma for international programs. I want to conclude this introduction by reading the ambassador's own words from a book, his autobiography, Mr. Ambassador, Warrior for Peace, that I heartily recommend. The occasion was his appointment as ambassador to South Africa. And he says, speaking of the United States, "Our nation is strong. That strength derives in no small measure from the vigor with which we Americans can pursue open debate and then compose our differences and work together for common national objectives. It comes from our diversity and our inherent tolerance of all people. But above all, I believe we are strong because of our respect for the dignity and worth of the individual, our encouragement of individual excellence, and our insistence that each person enjoy the right to achieve the highest of which he or she is capable. We are far yet short of perfection, but no one who knows us can doubt that we are committed to ceaselessly striving for it." Please help me welcome Ambassador Edward J. Perkins.
Thanks very much, Professor Wagner. I'm indebted to you for getting me here to take on the honor of speaking on the occasion of honoring Dorothy L. Thompson, a great citizen, committed citizen, in both in terms of civil rights and the rights under this compact that we live in called the Constitution. I wonder tonight what I might say for a few minutes that would really honor this committed woman and to honor the spirit that she embodied in ensuring that the rights of all people are observed, or, in the absence of that, the rights of none are observed. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for giving me a few minutes to talk to you. I'm a civil society person. I believe in the concept of civil society. Early on in my life, I became a devotee of Asian philosophy, especially the philosophy of Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, these many years ago, 4,000, 5,000 perhaps. A couple of things stand out. The best way to win is to win without fighting. But you can't win without knowing yourself first. And adversaries, such as they are, you know later. There's so many elements in our everyday lives that we just pick one or two out of the air and talk forever about it. But I do want to start off by saying that this experiment that we are under, which we call the Constitution of the United States, was in the making for a long time before some committed men decided to try it. And they were the first to make it work. Since that time, it's been an experiment. It's still an experiment. As I was often to say in South Africa, to all the people there, amid criticism, that if I criticized South Africa as it was then, well, Mr. Ambassador, your country is not perfect either. And I admitted I'd made a mistake, that I hadn't started off by saying our country is not perfect, that we are in constant revolution. As long as we're in revolution, we'll get better. But when we stop being revolutionaries, we will begin to atrophy, in my judgment. I'm also a devotee certainly of John Locke, of Madison, of Jefferson, and also of Rousseau, and believe it or not, of Plato and Aristotle. But I'm also a devotee of Franklin Roosevelt and of Jimmy Carter. Carter, because I was privileged to be a junior Foreign Service officer when he became president. And he came to office pushing for civil rights and human rights. And there were those in government, bureaucrats, many bureaucrats and many politicians, who said this man is chasing a fly. Something called human rights as an American foreign policy will never fly. Well, John and I, another junior Foreign Service officer, were given the job 1 week after Carter was inaugurated of doing the research to get this into Congress right away. We had to sell, first of all, the senior Foreign Service. And I remember that when we first started out, we couldn't get any information from the offices concerned. And so we did what any intelligent person should have done to begin with. We got to know the secretaries at all of the offices. A few well-chosen good mornings, acknowledgement of birthdays, and just being civil gave us everything we needed. And before anybody knew it, we'd handed Secretary Vance the advance plan. It went to the president one evening, and the next morning it came back, and the secretary sent it down to John and I, and on it was these words: excellent work. Give my regards to the drafters. Imagine how we felt. Well, human rights is a part of our policy. Human rights is a part of our efforts to have a foreign policy. Tonight, though, I want to address for just a few minutes something that concerns me a great deal, and that's foreign policy and religion. I mention and address religion because, in spite of what we may think today, religion has become a part of our lives other than the devotee to an idea. It's a part of the way we do business. But we don't know enough about it. So, I want to call two references before I go too much further. Walter Russell Mead, a great writer of religion and foreign policy, in the September-October 06 issue, talked about foreign policy under the title God's Country. In this article, he begins to address religion not as something we do on Mondays or Wednesdays or Sundays, but something that we observe as being a part of us and those with whom we must live in other countries, other communities. It's a good article. It examines some good aspects of today's Christian religion. I could talk about Buddhism as well. We don't have enough time. So today, on religion and foreign policy, and also a reference to something I call when religion becomes evil. And religion does become evil when one refuses to recognize it as an element that's a part of your daily activity. But more than that, when you recognize that some form of religion is a part of your neighbor's activity, whether the neighbor is next door, or in the next country, or in Iraq, in Iran, in India, in Pakistan, China, or Cambodia. Africa is a special case study with respect to religion because it embraces so many religions. But more than that, it embraces the three Christian religions that we think about. It embraces also all of the religions that are within the context of Judaism, of Christianity, and Islam. I speak as a citizen affected by all of these religions. When I was first ambassador to South Africa, it brought me face to face with religion as a tool of foreign policy. And I want to say straight away that foreign policy is your responsibility, not mine as a bureaucrat. A foreign policy that's effective is the subject and concern of citizens. It's not an esoteric element that you read about in the newspapers. It's the citizen's responsibility, and that's what I'm speaking for tonight. My colleagues and I found that we were struggling to understand a religion called the Dutch Reformed Church religion. We could not understand how a religion could be developed into a tool that was tinged with racism, with economic advantage, and with Christianity, and still be embodiment of the promises afforded by Jesus Christ, as it was claimed. So we enlisted the aid of the Afrikaner establishment, old Afrikaners who had lived the first 50, 60, 70 years of attempting to bring about a homeland for the Afrikaners. People like Dr. Johann Haynes, who was the moderator of the Dutch Reformed Church, old man Piet Cillier, who was a great journalism professor at Stellenbosch University, and the head of the Broederbond, the secret society of Afrikaner men, and others who represented the establishment. Corporately, the embassy decided to get inside of this religion. And the more we got inside of it, the more we understood that we didn't know anything about the Afrikaners. So I began to go to church, to the Afrikaner church. And at first, I was greeted with some suspicion. But eventually, the Afrikaners began to see me as someone who was interested in trying to understand them, and that I wasn't standing on the street corners preaching their debasement every day, but that I had enough respect for them to go to church and have tea with them after it was all over. We learned more about the Voortrekkers and the Voortrekker women and the Voortrekker daughters than we would have otherwise. Thus, we began to use other elements to try and make a difference in convincing the powers that be that change had to take place. But the basic element of our approach was understanding the Dutch Reformed Church and the elements that the adherents to that church had put into play in South Africa for the first 100 years of their existence. The artificial nature of the making of American foreign policy is just that, artificiality, unless the things close to the soul of a person is in this foreign policy. And we were determined to bring this soul right down front. In my view, religion, up to now, has been largely neglected as an element helping to develop American foreign policy. The failure, I think, has perhaps cost us some strategic advantages in several climes, several countries perhaps, especially in a changing world, a world which honors our past patriots, like Dorothy Thompson. But even she would have said, you learn today and look for change tomorrow, which will make it all better as we go along. The shifting for strategic review is always in front of us, whether we are talking about the person next door or the person in the country next door. It's always there. I think this realization has come pretty slow for this American nation, and I think we need to give it more attention. This is in spite of our adherence to a philosophy which many of you know as manifest destiny. That destiny was best explained by Theodore Roosevelt when he sent the Great White Fleet around the world. We are destined, we are manifested, he said, to do great things. I still think all humanity is manifested to do great things. But the one thing, the one philosophy that means most to all of us is something called religion. Today's remarks, when I speak of religion, I mean that intrinsic belief by the individual in a spiritual element which reflects his or her life. I also mean that part of the Declaration of Human Rights, which says this: all peoples have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Out of this, obviously, comes something called freedom of religion. Just the thought of this concept should force me and others like me to shudder at the minuteness of our apparent willingness to embrace this as an element of our foreign policy and through our foreign policy, our lives. I've already said that for purposes of brevity, I speak of the three monotheistic religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. This evening, I want to also say that in lots of places around the world, Islam is marching across our views with alarming rapidity. It begs for understanding. It begs for the understanding of the history and for the elements of advances to humanity in medicine, in education, that have gone on in earlier times, in earlier places, in other places. Such is the history of Islam. During my first few months in South Africa, I went to the north and visited a large Islamic community and had lunch. When lunch was over, the head of the community handed me a copy of the Quran. He said, "Mr. Ambassador, if you're going to have any success at all in South Africa, you'll have to know the Quran just as well as you probably know the Bible itself." Well, he was absolutely right. I hadn't just come to it, though, because in Liberia, my first ambassadorial post, where we attempted to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear with a master sergeant who had overthrown the government. He was a habitual abuser of human rights. And just as often as he abused them, I was directed by Washington to get people out of jail. But I recognized that you only go to the well so often. And I knew that one day he would say, "Go back to your embassy. I can run my country alone." So I went to his presidential advisor and said, "Look, you have to help me to help your president to do what he ought to do." And what I'm about to tell you, I've never told the State Department. So one Sunday he called me and said, "Come over to the house." There was an imam there from another country who was a spiritual advisor to Sergeant Doe, the head of state. And Peter said, "Tell him what you want." I told him. He said, "Okay, I'll help you." And here, Mr. Ambassador, is my personal copy of the Quran. He said, "Every time you ask me to do something for you, you find a verse in the Quran that will support it." And I don't have to tell you, I learned a lot about the Quran as a result of that. It was a great tactic on his part. So if we know our history, and history includes religion, then we'll be a lot more tolerant of ourselves and of others as well. Lesser known religions also are part of this. 1, 2, or 3 of all of the monotheistic religions impacts the lives of, God only knows, untold numbers of civilians, of soldiers, of civil servants, of housewives, of children, all of whom are being influenced by the events that take place today. Their soul is being impacted. And I know that some people in here are saying, "What does he mean by a soul?" I don't know, but I think it's better to say I'm talking about the inner self. I don't know what it is either, but I'm always looking for it. Foreign policy, it seems to me, knowledge of religion is a tool useful in the national interest at any time. One or all 3 of these monotheistic religions has subsumed several smaller religions along the way. But all of them together, and the professors know this, aid in the teaching of philosophy, of medicine, historical relevant materials that make us better. So think how helpful all of this has been to people who lived before we lived and have made it possible for us to believe and live as though we believe that we are civilized human beings. It didn't just happen automatically. It came through the efforts of others. So we understand it more than superficiality. Religions tell and define concepts of morality, of individualism, the concept of freedom to worship, and freedom to move about, and freedom to criticize the norm and the model that we have chosen to live by, which we call the Constitution. As for foreign policy, I said earlier, and I think we have neglected history. This neglect is like a long-playing CD, going back much beyond the execution of Jesus Christ. Plato and Aristotle noted religion when they each discussed the inner core of the citizen. Aristotle believed in a gradation of human beings. Some are born more than equal, and some were less equal. But nevertheless, they were all humans, and there had to be a way to ensure that they were citizens as well. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, from whom we've borrowed a lot, actually thought that you had to have a certain group of citizens who were selected to represent you and to govern, because some citizens were not capable of doing it. Now we say, we select who it is who think along the lines that we think are useful for our society. We never mention religion, and we shouldn't have to, because it's a part of our daily lives. But at the same time, many of our public servants and our political servants go and do our bidding on a false basis, unless the concept of understanding religion is a part of our national interest, our national policy. Jefferson, Woodrow Wilson, and Roosevelt, all three pushed for an understanding of religion. Roosevelt especially. He ensured that the Constitution that we now call the basis on which we have a United Nations understood that humans have to be involved in the religions of the world. I want to quote a book, apart from a book, called When Religions Turn Evil. When Religions Turn Evil. The word religion evokes a wide variety of images, ideas, practices, beliefs, and experiences, some positive and some negative. And they all determine how we think. Let me end this by saying these words, if I may. The United States recently embraced religion as a foreign policy element for the first time about 10 years ago with the establishment of the Commission on Religious Tolerance. The good part about this is that the membership includes all the religions practiced in the United States: Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and so on. When I sit down and talk to the chair, I ask, why are you so against Cuba, for example? He said, it's because religion is not respected. Now that's a personal view of the chairman, who is no longer there, but I was pleased that we have this commission, and this commission means that whether we're dealing with sub-Saharan Africa, India, Iraq, or China, we won't forget that in order to understand where all of these people are coming from, we have to understand what they believe in. What will they go to war over? How will they be offended? So the Commission on Religion and Foreign Policy is not an operational element. But I ask you, along with myself, as far as the United States is concerned, and as far as your community is concerned, foreign policy is your element. It's your responsibility and mine. If you don't demand that it represent the national interest, then it probably won't. And we will be the lesser for it. So I want to end this by saying this. You're fortunate to have such heroines and heroes as Dorothy Thompson that you can refer to from time to time because she left the better part of herself with us. and there are others amongst us that ought to always be held up and encouraged. And whether they believe in something or not, they're going to be affected by whether or not we have an element called religion and foreign policy. And thus, I end this by calling on the kind of partnership that makes certain that the United States, as a nation, involved in attempting to influence others, as all nations do. We don't want to leave out an important element, and that element is the concept of religion. And with that, I thank you very much.
Would you take some questions? Sure. Ambassador Perkins will be happy to take some questions from the audience. If you'll state your question or comment, I am certain that I will be able to relay it so that everyone can hear it, and then Ambassador Perkins can speak through the microphone. To start that ball rolling, let me ask the first question. Ambassador Perkins, how do you suggest we respond when the religious beliefs of a group require or produce intolerance for another group? I can think of two examples. First, the Dutch Reformed Church that you dealt with in South Africa, but I think also today of the democratically elected government of Palestine that has a rather intolerant attitude toward Israel. What should U.S. foreign policy do in situations like this?
Well, certainly we probably ought to take Palestine first.
Okay.
Well, U.S. foreign policy must always continue to show its intolerance of the intolerance of an element like Palestine or any other nation state. We haven't done as much as we possibly could in suggesting that this is an intolerable situation for a learned people. That if we want to be what we call helpful in developing relations with an outfit like the coming Palestine state, then there are certain things that we believe in as well, and they have to be stated very clearly and not under the table. I urge our government to be even more insistent. The concept of human rights is an element of religion. Sometimes it's abused and sometimes it's not. In the case of South Africa, the first time I called on the moderator of the Dutch Reformed Church, I went to his house. And I said, thank you for receiving me, but I'm here to tell you why I'm in South Africa. He said, I know why you're in South Africa. You're in South Africa to change us. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus Christ set you here because we don't know what to do. And he had on his desk a book by Martin Luther King, Jr. And when I expressed surprise, he said, look, we have bastardized our religion. Somewhere along the way, he said, we took the wrong turn. And this was echoed to me by Alan Paton as well. Paton considered the Afrikaners to be the beginnings of a noble people. And somewhere along the way, he said they took the wrong turn. And he said, now maybe you can help us find the right turn. Well, that sounds like pie in the sky, but as it happened, after elections took place in South Africa, a very well-known black activist, a woman, who, when I suggested that Afrikaners and black people in South Africa have more in common with each other than with the outside, She was the first who wanted to run me out of town on a rail. 2 or 3 years later, she said, when I called on her, "You were right. Now we have to do our part in bringing all of us together. Help us." So the next time I called on Johann Haynes, I said, "What are the young dominees, the young ministers doing these days?" I said, "If they're not preaching from their pulpits on unity and understanding, then they're not doing their job." So he changed it. And now, more and more non-Afrikaner people are becoming a part of the Dutch Reformed Church. Why? Because it is no longer the Dutch Reformed Church that it was in 1986, and 87, and 88. So I guess what I'm suggesting here is it's not telling one what to do, it's suggesting that we have a road to travel together. And let's try to know ourselves first, and then we can maybe understand the person in front of us.
So you'd suggest the Israelis and the Palestinians recognize that they have common interests?
Precisely. In the back.
In such a polarized world, you could easily say that people in imitating Christ have done wonderful things, and people in the name of Christ have done horrible things. And you could say the same for any religion. I mean, when you have, fanatical Wahhabism, when you have the Lord's Army in Africa, how do you get past fanaticism to a point where you can make progress within religion?
I have two answers for you. First is I've seen wonderful efforts on the part of small communities in Cambodia, in China of all places, certainly in South Africa, in Nigeria. They've attempted to show that there is something called sisterhood and brotherhood amongst religions. And the other is that all the religions have done some great things for humanity. All the three monotheistic religions have. But we don't talk about it very much, nor do we use it as a tool of learning, of teaching, across the borders of religion as well. Now, I'm here speaking kind of like an ecclesiastical clergyman, but I'm far from that. I'm a practical diplomat. And I know that as long as we keep it under the table, it's going to come up, we're going to come up short. The Chinese adage, which we always talk about, is that the journey of 1 mile or 1,000 miles begins with the first step. But the fact is, we've taken a lot of steps. We just have to keep on taking these steps.
Yes, ma'am.
That's perfect. Thank you for coming to K-State. It's very refreshing to see that government officials, past and present, are speaking of religion and the way you have, in addition to foreign policy and work. What would you say as students that we can do as a small part of our world here in Manhattan, Kansas, and in the great Midwest to do to bridge the divide between Africa, the continent, of course, but certainly South Africa specifically, and Manhattan, Kansas?
Thank you. I would certainly hope that as you commune with people in other countries, and particularly the African continent, and sub-Saharan Africa in particular, that you find ways to, I don't want to call them tea parties, but I would say history parties, religious history parties. Not with just one adherent group, but across all the groups, to sit and talk. I delivered this lecture in a different form at Georgetown University a couple of months ago. And there the audience was made up of several Muslim students. And of course I was concerned that I would be criticized. The leader of the Muslim group, a woman, came up to me afterwards and said she thought it was enlightening. And Mr. Ambassador, would you agree to give this same lecture to an all-Muslim audience? And I thought for a few minutes, and I said yes. That's going to take place next month. So, why did I say that? Well, the simple answer is, Perkins, you have to put your money where your mouth is. If you believe in what you're saying, then you have to be willing to say it often and hope that someone listens. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Back to the question of South Africa. Do you believe that maybe the independence in 1994 of South Africa, can you hear me?
Yeah, just step out of the aisle. Yes, sir.
Do you believe that the independence of South Africa in 1994 may just have been a farce in terms of the white minority realizing that this couldn't continue in the way that it was continuing? And if so, how do you think, well, you wouldn't, I'm sure you wouldn't really know unless you've been back there. How do you think that South Africa has changed as a country?
Yes.
Let me say it out loud in case people over here could not hear. The question was the 1994 election in South Africa that changed the government, was that just a plot, I believe was the term you used? And if so, how do you really think South Africa has changed? Have I captured your question?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
I think it was a genuine revolution. There are still some of my colleagues who were young comrades in the day when I was ambassador, who still believe that they believe in a scorched earth policy. And one of the people that I worked with as a young person is now a member of parliament. And when I called on her last year, she said, Mr. Ambassador, I still believe in a scorched earth policy. Then we would know who won. I believe the revolutionary won. But the revolution is not yet won. Economically, socially, or perhaps not even constitutionally, even though there's a great constitution in writing. And it will not be won until the most numerous of the populations learn about each other such that they can work together and realize that when one protects and promotes the well-being of the other, he or she is promoting their own well-being. And that same lesson, of course, applies to us as well. And sometimes we know that. So the answer in summation is, yes, I believe it was a genuine revolution. But I will say straight away, there is a lot left to do to institutionalize that. And it will not be a country where one group of people lords it over another one, as the Afrikaners did for so long, because that's disaster. I do believe that the current president and many of the people in the African National Congress and some of the small parties recognize this and are doing whatever possible to try and make it happen. But there's some problems. There's a land problem. How are blacks going to acquire land? Housing, sewer systems, and the most important of all, education, which must be more widespread than it is now in order for South Africa to grow the kind of insurance that will make it a great country. And I think that will happen. Oh, there's one over, yes, sir.
My question is about since you are former ambassador in the United Nations, and especially now that religious intolerance has been increasing, is there any role United Nations as the biggest body in the world is playing about religious tolerance?
Yeah. Thank you. I think there is. First of all, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is pretty clear about the need for tolerance. I think the United Nations, especially the Security Council, perhaps in partnership with the Secretary General, needs to make that a primary issue that's on every agenda that the United Nations pursues from now on. I think if they did that, they would find perhaps even more tolerance of the idea that others have to be tolerant. But I want you to know this is not going to happen tomorrow. But I think the UN ought to be right out front, along with the P5, the permanent 5 nations themselves. Yes, sir.
I've heard a lot of worries that South Africa is sort of going the route of Rhodesia at this point, looking at some drastic land reforms. A lot of people would say are going to create much more hardship than currently existing, and just sort of the same sort of schemes that Mugabe has been rolling over people for the last 30 years now. You want to comment on that?
Yes. South Africa has not yet decided to go the way of Comrade Mugabe. I guess my betting is, from what I know today, that it will not do that. There's a lot of pressure on the current president to come up with a plan of action for land redistribution, to approach it like Zimbabwe did would mean disaster for South Africa. And there's no way they can go that way. From what I know of what's taking place in the government now, especially in the councils of policymaking, the president has already rejected some rather drastic plans of action and is looking for one that achieves two things. One, it does indeed give black citizens a chance to recover title to land. But it also means, the plan means to keep the economy going, because a failed economy hurts those who have less today. In the back.
Yes, I'm wondering, I listened to your discussion and I'm trying to understand your concept of religion, how broad it is, whether it's broad enough to include those for whom perhaps the closest thing to a religion is humanism. Those who might be outside even the longest list you can make of a religion, is there still a need, or are they left out of somehow the policy making? Is religion the main important denominator for deciding how to interact and who's in and who's out of political discussions in the world? Is there also a need for tolerance of those who might not adhere to a particular religion?
I tried to have a limitless definition by quoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I think includes all of what you say. But the answer to your question is, none of what I've said is meant to say that some are in and some are out. I started off by saying, know thy inner self first, and that self is perhaps the best definition of what my religion is. something I can live with and something I need each day. But it's Perkins' interpretation of that. And I have a reasonable expectation that no one's going to try to take it away from me because it doesn't accord with what they think should be the religion. And that's what I think our goals ought to be, a system of tolerances. That's the basis of this Commission on Human Rights, not human rights, Commission on Religion with respect to foreign policy. I must say it won't happen overnight. But we're not in the vineyards fighting a war by swords, but we are at a point where we perhaps ought to promote more understanding and more tolerance, perhaps, as a tool for foreign policy and maybe even community policy too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming back today.